don't you honestly think that the conceptualization of the higher power, aka God or Allah, is way more rational and goes in line with our human nature compared to the biblical version of God? I guess, Marshall Ayub, I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Are you trying to argue for a deist God? Um, a kind of rational God, a solely rational God? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you actually trying to suggest that that Allah is a more rational God than the biblical God? I'm not quite sure what you're saying, so I'm going to take my best guess. And going off your name, Ayub, I'm going to assume that there's some kind of Islamic connection to this question and the fact that you use Allah, and I'm going to address it in that way. But if I'm wrong and you were coming at it from a different angle, I apologize. So firstly, let's be clear, the Allah of Islam is not a rational God. Firstly, Muslims say that he is a monad, a singularity, but the texts of the Hadith and the Quran clearly show that he's composite, that he has attributes that are him but not him, and that he has bodily forms that are him but not him. Now, this kind of logic that my knowledge is me but it's not me is based on the fact that I'm a temporal transient being, so that I can lose my knowledge, and so I can talk about knowledge as being mine but not mine, or a particular aspect of knowledge as being mine but not mine. I can lose it. God can't lose it, and so you can't use that logic argument to speak about God. Furthermore, if you're saying that Allah is a monad and a singularity and completely other to his creation, then that means even your language immediately breaks down the moment you try to make any comparisons using human concepts. So saying that Allah's knowledge can be his but not him but not his, or him but not him, in the same way that my knowledge can be me but not me, is a fallacy according to your own logic. So the texts are saying one thing, Islamic theology is saying another, but following the logic of Islamic theology, Allah doesn't even interact or can't interact with his creation in any direct way. You do not know who Allah is, because Allah doesn't enter into his creation in any way. Because if he does, then he has entered into his creation. And the Islamic texts are full of contradictory passages that certainly contradict this idea that God can't enter into his creation, because he's said to be in heaven, he's said to be within vision, something that he has created, an attribute that he has created. He's said to be veiled by light. He's said to, the Quran itself, he's said to intercede to Allah on behalf of the believer, that surahs come as birds, that Allah comes as a shape that is recognized by Muslims, which I imagine would be a shin with two right hands. Now, that's not a rational. That is not a more rational God. You can't have it both ways. If God can be veiled in light, if he has light, if he is light, which is something of a created order, but Allah has it, then even the descriptions of Allah compromise his otherness. So, we Christians can't take lectures about this. And to say that, Allah could enter his creation but doesn't enter his creation because it's not befitting of his majesty, well, on this we agree. God entering into his creation is not befitting of his majesty, but it is a statement about his love. That his love is such that he is willing to forego the dignity of his majesty to enter into creation, which is exactly why our God is a greater God than Allah. So in terms of the biblical God is one who cares for his creation, interacts with his creation, enters his creation. And I believe that this is it's more rational, because this kind of God that just sends letters from afar but never interacts. I don't see how that is more or less rational than our belief than a God who, as well as creating, enters into his creation to interact directly with his creation. There's nothing more or less irrational about that, especially when you consider Islamic texts and what they say about Allah being veiled in light and having a shape and having body parts and having attributes that are themselves self-contradictory. The idea that Allah is a creator eternally, but there's no creation eternally, is self-contradiction. The idea that Allah is merciful, even though there's not always someone to give his mercy to, because mercy by its nature is a transaction, is a contradiction. So that's irrational. We Christians don't have this issue, because we Christians believe that God in his essence is wholly other to the creation, but from his essence comes his energies, and these energies of God that emanate from his essence are the things that we understand as his attributes that they interact with, and that God himself interacts with his creation by his Holy Spirit, by the person of Jesus Christ. But he's not just a more rational God. Because we may make also a distinction between those attributes that are essential to his nature and those attributes that are dependent on creation. So we say that God is creator, but we don't say that God was always the creator. We say that God is the creator when he creates. So we don't have the kind of contradictions that happen in Islam. But within the Christian faith, we also have a greater God. He's not just more rational, but he is actually, by his character, a greater God than Allah. Because Allah is a distant king who expects obedience, but won't even speak to you face to face. The Christian God is a king who expects your obedience, but he comes and he washes your feet, and then he says, do likewise. Now that is a more majestic, more beautiful vision of God than anything in Islam. Like, that inspires me to prostrate myself to this kind of king. Whereas in Islam, all you get are letters, and the letters tell you to do some very dodgy stuff. And you don't even know who's sending the letters. Muhammad himself says that he didn't see God. How could I see God? He is veiled in light. That's a contradiction right there. Light is something created. How can something created veil God? That's your logic. We believe that God can take on human nature unto himself and veil himself in flesh. So I hope that answers your question, but obviously do write to me if you want to go into it, depending on what this next question is.